on the 16th of October 2017. The title of this episode is Seattle Mayoral AARP Debate. It was held at the studios of Channel 4, Como there, K-N-O-R-K-O-M, in Seattle. On the 12th of October, it was rebroadcast on a Saturday there. Between the candidates, they're down to two now. Cary Moon, a progressive candidate, and Jenny Durkan, representing the establishment in Seattle, the same people that brought you Hillary the Monster Clinton. The debate is about 50 minutes long. We'll go to it, but first of all, we'll do some backgrounder from the Post-Intelligentsia and the Seattle Times. And the Seattle Times happens to have the backgrounds of the candidates, and we'll go through those firstly here as we move along here with our what we call modular series. We'll be doing more and more of these broadcasts on city mayoral elections from Boston to Seattle and into the Midwest and points in between and other types of election activity. Last night we had a modular series there, the Crimson Tide. That is the senatorial contest in the deep red state of Alabama between Judge Roy Moore, at one time Justice Roy Moore, and Doug Jones, a former U.S. attorney and civil rights lawyer. So those are the kinds of things that we do, and later this morning we'll have, of course, the Monday Morning Quarterback that we normally have, and this program will be linked to it. That's what we talk about, the modular format. Now, on some stations you will hear this, definitely from WBRN in Boston and the Boston Red Network, and some others out there. We normally post these on our Facebook page, which goes to the public, and our Boston Red Twitter feed. We also have almost complete now the macroeconomics program, Numbers Man, that will appear also on many of these outlets. But let's firstly get to the race at hand. This is from the Seattle Times, who has what it takes to be the mayor of Seattle. A hard look at the careers of Ms. Durkan and Ms. Moon as they vie to lead the city. Now, this is an interesting situation there. As you heard in the debate, Ms. Moon has won praise as an urbanist, an urbanist, I get it right in a minute here, an activist who crusade against the Seattle waterfront tunnel. But according to this, and this is something you'll see, and we'll get to it in a minute, she has a quote-unquote sparse management experience. Durkan, who was a U.S. attorney, has a lot of credentials, supposedly, but she hasn't ran a city before, tied to power brokers that are drawing scrutiny. So in other words, Ms. Durkan is the establishment candidate, period. We'll start this off with Durkan because she's the easiest one to get rid of as far as experiences here. This is what they have put together on her, that she has, quote-unquote, the credentials, and she's a former U.S. attorney, which means nothing. The city of Seattle has nothing to do with an attorney there. The U.S. Attorney's Office has many minions involved there. She's drawn scrutiny from social justice activists that raise their voice against inside politics, mass incarcerations, and corporate might. As a trial lawyer and commanding courtroom manner, she has gone to bat for and against political giants, for the accused and people accused. No doubt about that. She was the first openly gay U.S. attorney appointed by Barack Obama. And she signed the consent decree with the city of Seattle. And this is one of the things here that the former King County executive, Ron Sims, I want a person I know is going to be a great captain of the ship who knows how to get things done. Well, that's where the big debate goes. This Sims has endorsed Durkan here, and that Waite's background against Durkan's relatively lack of experience working with neighborhoods on transportation housing. She's worked on none of these, and these are the issues in Seattle, period. After leaving the post, Durkan joined the world's largest white shoe firm and now renting a home downtown. She and her partner, and it doesn't matter who the partner is, own a 6,570-foot Windermere home. I haven't seen her down at City Hall on the issues other than police reform. That's from Michael Bryan, who is supporting Cary Moon. There's a swap of our community who think these are real important decisions and really important people should make them. Really important people are people who have rubbed elbows with folks at the top. That's what O'Brien says. And I'm looking for someone who is deeply involved in the community. Durkan has had to learn about these issues as a candidate. She didn't know anything about it. She was with the former governor, Christine Jerry. I used to could pronounce her name, but anyway, she's gone. She defending her prosecution of some medical marijuana sellers. And this is where she's now talking about having a safe haven for needle users before Washington voters made recreational pot legal. She tried to explain why no Washington big shot went to prison. And this was when she was dealing with the banks. She was arguing that someone who put people behind bars can move the city away from the prison industrial complex. Well, not only that, she grew up in a legislative house, so she knows how to go along to, quote-unquote, get along. She joined the Seattle law firm here, Goldmark Binter, for 6 years, short stints as an executive counsel to Mike Laurie. He died recently. He used to be a governor, helping start Gravy, a telecommunication management project. She defended Laurie when his deputy press secretary, Susan Albright, accused him of groping her. So she's definitely been... After a week later, Durkan resigned. Laurie agreed to pay $97,500 without admitting wrongdoing, so he was a groper. Heading her own law practice from 1997 to 2009, she won millions for her clients, including rallies of a man stabbed after a Mariners game. But this is just some of the things that she did up and down. Time at the U.S. Attorney's Office. She ran the office there. As proof she could handle a $5 billion plus annual budget of 12,000 people. Well, she had 150 people at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but that budget comes from Washington. Period. And other things there. Well, anyway, we'll get. Let's see. We get down here where she works 80 hours a week, but again, the reform process began. And this is the many of the Seattle PD. When 34 community groups and the ACLU of Washington asked Durkan and Perez's Uncle Tom Perez, to investigate the Seattle department. She knew of the problem. She and Perez agreed to investigate. Mike McGlynn was the mayor. Negotiation with the then mayor, but ultimately resulted was a court settlement on reform. She was personally involved in the meeting, she claims, and bumps in the road came when Ed Murray, who is no longer around, replaced the police chief Jim Padgett, who had been working with Durkan to translate the decree. Durkan did not speak out against the move. Still, Padgett donated to a campaign. Recalling one-on-one meetings with the U.S. attorney to hash out disagreements without the usual witness and note takers, he said, I believe she trusted me and I trusted her. Well, so what? Progress was hard to see in July when the fatal shooting that was mentioned incidentally in the debate with Charlena Lyles in her Seattle home. On Friday, the Justice Department found the city in compliance with the decree. It happens many, many times. And Georgieri, I'll get that name right. She busted these marijuana dispensaries, which are now legal. And one of them, Corey, was sentenced to probation for conspiracy to distribute marijuana. Voters have jumped ahead to approve the recreational drugs. Corey was an African American. They knew I had 4 kids and a wife. They said, either you sign this or we're going to send you to prison for 5 years. So in other words, she was an opportunist. Durkan said she left medical marijuana patients and doctors alone. So she said. Douglas Hyatt, a lawyer and part reform activist, said the approach was reasonable. She didn't prosecute in a draconian way. She used her discretion well. And she goes on to Washington Mutual. Most people heard of Washington Mutual. It was one of the big banks out in the Pacific Northwest. Like other prosecutors, she stopped short of putting these scumbags in jail. I inherited the case when I came in, Durkan said, mentioning of the same people within the Department of Justice family wanted to shut down the investigation. And then came a juncture when some argued that we had reached the end of the line. Well, definitely the end of the line. She didn't oppose the end of the line. Bankers at the time had basically passed... because of the way the law was constructed, she said, a law professor there, Mary Fan, who followed the case. It had been incredibly challenging up the ladder to reach the executives. Well, that's, again. Western Washington has a tradition of moderate U.S. attorneys. That's from Tom Hiller, who went toe-to-toe with Durkan as Seattle's head federal prosecutor. Durkan was part of that, Hiller said, noting that she set up a pioneering drug court. I watched my clients graduate from the program last month. Anyway, she's a moderate, so that's the whole situation there. Moon has criticized Durkan for joining a corporate law firm rather than devoting more time to civic issues. Evidently, this woman Durkan is just an opportunist. She rushed to the airport on the DJ Trump immigrant issues there. period, she helped environmental groups quash a subpoena from ExxonMobil, as the company fought anyway. From Patricia Scully, a staff attorney with the Public Defenders Association, said she was disappointed earlier this year to hear Durkan offer less than wholehearted support. Then Durkan met with Scully and other advocates, and next time she addressed the issue publicly, the candidate backed the site proposal. Now, this is open drug consumption sites. These things are done as opportunistic. Let's go to Cary Moon. We didn't want to spend as much time on Durkan. From the time she moved to Seattle, she's been very active, focusing on Elliott Bay waterfront. She came to see from her downtown what they called a penthouse. It was a condo, not a penthouse. As a campaign, and you can understand the bias here. This is by Steve Brunner and Susie Kelleher. Anyway, struggled to show that she has management experience. Well, she does. Educated engineer, landscape architect. She's best known as co-founder of the People's Waterfront Coalition, a scrappy group of activists that unsuccessfully fought the deep bore tunnel now under construction to replace the old Alaskan Way viaduct. Beyond that, she worked as self-employed urban designer who co-wrote a neighborhood plan for Pioneer Square. That was back in 1998, and served on the city design commission there. When making a political donation recently, Moon frequently listed her occupation, and this is as retired or unemployed. Anyway, she said she had been on sabbatical from paid work studying issues as racial inequality. We'll get to that in a minute. She evidently made an A in that course. For her accomplishments, she ticks off a heavy list of intangibles with terms like guarding, helping, steering, building public will. Cary was one of the early visionaries for the viaduct-free waterfront. That is from Chris Jones, a developer who served on the committee. So you're going to hear some positive things in here. What jobs had she had? Said three-term Mayor Roya, who is supporting Moon's rival, no doubt. She has life experience here. See, this is a big problem. All of these establishment characters are supporting Jenny Durkan, and they would do that about that. Evidently, they go on to say, well, Moon, this is outside agitator, I suppose, born in 1963 in Indiana. 7 kids were there. Cary Moon, and her father was an engineer also. They moved to Bakken, Michigan. They made respirators, had a firm called Protect Respirators, and it grew to 112 workers. According to an older brother who ran the company's engineering and marketing department for 4 years, who had his sister worked there as the operating manager. So she's got operating experience, a little different from being in the U.S. Attorney's office there where everything is already set up. She earned her degree as an operating engineer from the University of Michigan, spent 2 years working for the Department of Labor, followed by several years as an operating engineer for Redmond Microelectronics firm. She returned to Michigan and ran the operations to the end of the company, which distributed profit sharing, etc. at Protect. So various stories there of how the profit sharing occurred. We won't go into that. The worker ownership plan there, it was sold in 1995 for $6.8 million. So according to Cary, workers got from $50,000 to $60,000, a lot of money there. She married in '92. 2 years later, she left the family business to earn a master's in landscape architecture with a certificate in urban design from the University of Pennsylvania. She and her husband moved to Seattle in Pioneer Square. She started her own company there and befriended her landlord, Renee Tanner, who had a contract with the city to write a plan. She was a subcontractor there, and she has been at it ever since. Low, middle units there, so she's, in other words, she's been in urban planning forever, been an advocate forever, and she calls for civility for not targeting at homeless people. And, of course, won't get back into the waterfront. She's been working on the waterfront forever. Campaigns, she paid a year as a group was paid as 40 to 60 million. Anyway, these are just things. Along with emerged as Mike McGinn as a leading opponent of the deep bore tunnel. Moon still won accolades for her advocacy. The Stranger, that is a paper there, gave her an honorary Political Genius Award in 2007, and later the Municipal League of King County named her, that is where Seattle, as she now lives in a $1.5 million penthouse condo she bought in 2014 with her second husband, an architect, Reddington there, who also served as city waterfront committee. While acknowledging her property would benefit from the viaduct removal, she said her commitment to the work had never been motivated by it. In fact, she bought this particular unit where she is after someone else was foreclosed on there. So it was one of the things that had happened. And let's see if we can... I read this earlier. I actually found that where it was... some prominent leaders involved there who are supporting Durkan contend is overstating. Well, anyway, naturally they would contend this, that she's overstating her qualifications. There with the waterfront committee. So some of the things going on here is I don't know if this has the rundown of how she came into the property here, but evidently it went into foreclosure. She bought the property somewhere. She now lives. Now I'm not sure. Maybe she moved on from that property. I don't really have that screen up here now. Let's see if we can find it really quickly. This is one of the big problems. No, we don't. We're not going to be able to find it, but anyway, nonetheless, it was there. And let's go to the Post Intelligencer to finish this up. I think this is probably where it was. And one of the quotes, memorable quotes, I'm not asking for permission from Olympia. Moon said, I'm building the public will and leading from the city of Seattle because this is a problem we need to solve and we need to take ownership of it. So in other words, what she's saying here, she would be an activist mayor, no doubt about that, as to how she sees things. So she's actually ridden a bus. This is from the Post Intelligencer. I doubt if Durkan ever has. Now, As it happens that her husband, Mike Reddington, is lead architect on the massive expansion of the Seattle Convention Center. She acknowledged that there is a conflict and could arise as the city and sound transit work together. She would say recuse herself from any decision involving that. So in other words, it's a small city with candidates. Well, anyway, this is not part of. It doesn't bring out the issue that we were looking for here, but again, let me just see very quickly here. She does talk about white privilege. The very mention, this is Cary Moon, the very mention of white privilege is very important, because when you live in a $1.2 million house, but you have to remember, if it's a penthouse in Seattle, in those areas, these properties at one time would have been $500 million, have exploded. And if he's an architect, he obviously could afford it. Period. And this is the Emerald City, she argues, has been at the beck and call of white people who have access to power and think they are superior. The solution to the city government, top to bottom, of racial, gender, and income inequality. The words are provocative, coming from a white woman married to an architect who has used her money for the lion's share of the campaign war chest. Well, yeah. We need to look at anti-racist training across the city. She said this in a debate, period. Now, because she's married to an architect that has means, doesn't necessarily mean that she had means there. I mean, because she was talking about her own situation where she sold her condo, living in Pioneer Square, and bought one in a foreclosure. And I guess that was prior to with the architect there. But we saw that, and as to which article, we saw it in one of these articles here that mentioned that particular plight. But understand, in a campaign, the mere mentioning of white privilege is very, very important. Now, one of the lessons learned in Seattle, we'll go back to Nikita Gardner here. She was a campaign of the People's Party there. Haven't heard exactly what they are doing in Seattle, but a very important part of it. And we need to understand that when we look at the landscape in cities like Seattle, no doubt these tech companies, point them out, the Amazons of the world, the Microsoft used to be of the world, have come into Seattle. And of course, a little bit here. We lived in Seattle at one time, and that was before Microsoft came to town. The local enterprise there that was important economically was what the people called out there Boeings. The Boeing aircraft industry enterprise moved their headquarters to Chicago. But they still are down in Renton. They, have factories there and assemble planes in Beijing. So things have changed a bit, but this whole so-called high-tech operation that's come there, we only need to look at lawsuits and complaints of discrimination against Google, Facebook, etc. Now, Google, Facebook are small compared to Amazon and some of the other big techs and what they've driven this economy in Seattle. But when I lived there and we departed there in 1980, the property values were already starting to go up. Now, this is before Microsoft, and around that part of Washington State. It wasn't so bad you had to move to some place like Pasco, but at the same time, it was not, as they say, as user-friendly. Now, yes, Pioneer Square, the Pike Market were there. In fact, they sold horse meat at that time. Were there, and the old brownstones were there. They hadn't gentrified the place yet. And if you went up to Queen Anne Hill and some other places, the University of Seattle, or over to the U District, they had not gentrified those. But just as in Boston, they've gentrified all of these areas. It's just in Seattle they have been on steroids, and it's easy to do because Seattle is not Boston. Boston's on the East Coast. You can get the train to New York or to Washington, D.C. A different type of a situation than Seattle out in the Pacific Northwest is isolated. It's 500 miles from San Francisco. So it does have more of a pioneer effect, or it did. But people like Cary Moon are moving into town. And just because she found a fellow that was an architect doesn't necessarily mean that much. But you can also understand that the establishment candidate here, Durkan, has the big endorsements like the Operating Engineers Union, which most of those people don't live in Seattle, and the quote-unquote Democratic machine. So the voters in Seattle have to look at where the Democratic machine has got them, particularly under the disgraced Mayor Murray. And in fact, old Durkan removed his endorsement from his site. I suppose she was late at the draw on that one. But Murray ran a get-along campaign with the various enterprises of Seattle. He was on a trickle-down theory operation, and not much has trickled. What has happened there is seniors are being pushed out of their homes. Oppressed minorities are being pushed out of their homes and their neighborhoods. The homeless are in the streets and being even pushed out of the parks. But there's been no concerted effort for the homeless because, quite frankly, downtown Seattle, various other areas where the homeless were, the homeless shelters have disappeared, no doubt. And now they're talking about restoring some housing because they have these people and have to do something about them. They can't move them all to Pasco. So in other words, that is a situation as it is in Northern California. You have the wildfires out there because urbanization, we'll call it that, has gotten into the countryside. Even the poor bears have had to leave town. So now the homes have all burnt down. Part of that, of course, is blamed on the electric company there for not maintaining their lines. So there are a lot of problems in Seattle. That's the reason we have endorsed Cary Moon. And to the people of Seattle, that is no doubt the way to go and tell anybody how to vote, but to look very carefully at Cary Moon. And one of the things we would like to emphasize, the progressive people of Seattle need to get together. Now, obviously, the People's Party, if they don't see Cary Moon as a progressive, but all you need to do is read the article in the Seattle Times. You will find out right away who the progressive person is. And the slander about where she lives, well, where she lives, she can't get around that. But Jenny Durkan is in even a bigger house. So this whole thing is, if you look at Cary Moon's background, she's not been about money. She's been about education and empowerment. She's no doubt ahead of her time out in Seattle, and we wish her well. This is all for us. We'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback on the same outlets from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. Good day. And the full debate comes after us. Our broadcast is about 50 minutes. Enlighten you to, or you will be enlightened, I should say, to tune to the debate, or you can go to KOMO, Channel 4 in Seattle. The debate is archived there if you want to actually see the people speak. Good day.
From traffic to housing affordability, homelessness, and public safety, tonight the candidates for Seattle Mayor will take on the questions most important to our city. And big thanks to the candidates, Cary Moon and Jenny Durkan, for being with us this evening. Before we get started, though, a look at the rules. After each question, Candidate 1 will get 90 seconds to answer, followed by 90 seconds for Candidate 2, and then a 30-second rebuttal back to Candidate 1. We will alternate who answers first. We'll give warnings to each candidate when they're running out of time to make sure we get as many questions as we can in tonight. And earlier tonight, the campaigns flipped a coin to decide who gives their opening statement first. And Cary, that was you. You have 2 minutes beginning now.
Right on. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, AARP. Thank you, Como. It is really great to be here. And I would just like to say it's really exciting that we are going to elect our first female mayor in 90 years in this city. So there's a lot at stake in this election. Is Seattle going to become a city that is welcoming, that's accessible, that's affordable to all folks at all ages and stages in life? Or is Seattle going to become a playground for the rich and beholden to corporate interests? I think you're going to see a lot of similarity in our answers tonight, but if you listen carefully, you will really see a difference in who we are, who we listen to, and how we will govern. I am an engineer. I'm an urban planner. I've been working for 20 years in this city because I love this place so much, addressing these very challenges that we all see in front of us. I launched this campaign with very concrete vision for a future Seattle that's welcoming, inclusive, affordable, creative, and committed to shared prosperity. And I have detailed, bold, transformative solutions from the beginning because Seattle is an intelligent city that cares about the well-being of everyone. We need to be talking about new solutions and new approaches to these challenges. I have committed to create a leadership team that is filled with professional experts ready to hit the ground running with the kind of expertise it takes to deliver city services. Because I know the job of mayor is not one person's job. It's a leadership job for the whole 11,000 people who work in the city. So we need effective, collaborative leadership between the mayor's office and the city employees, between the mayor's office and council, between the mayor's office and all the citizens and organizations and advocacy groups ready to implement bold solutions. I am committed to bringing ethical, transparent leadership back to the mayor's office, and I'm committed to collaborative leadership, ready to work together with all of you. Thanks.
Cary, thank you very much. Jenny, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and my thanks to Como and to AARP, the people listening at home, and to the people here in the audience. This is a pivotal time for Seattle and a pivotal time for our country. We really have decisions to make today about how to make Seattle more affordable and livable for everyone. But this election's not about who will be mayor for 4 years. It really is an election about what will Seattle be like for the next generation. You know, I was born here and my mother was born and raised here, and I've had the opportunity to raise my 2 sons here. But Seattle is changing almost overnight. It's becoming too unaffordable and people can't afford to live here, and many people can't afford to stay here. They are being pushed out of their homes by raising costs. Wage disparity is at its most. We have a horrible problem with the homeless, and transportation, as we've talked about, is really hard. I look forward to the questions today because I've put out some very specific plans on how we attack these issues, and particularly the issues we're here to talk about tonight, with how we have an age-friendly Seattle and age gracefully into not just for the people who are here today, but for the next generation. We have to remember that the choices we make today really are the choices about what Seattle will be like tomorrow. We've always been that city that has invented the future, that has had a broad alignment between progressive values and action. My experience as U.S. Attorney and before that has been a person who's tackled those tough civic problems, brought people together, and moved forward on solutions. There's a big difference between bold plans and bold plans plus action. I want to be the mayor that has bold plans and action. I've got the experience to do that and have built probably the most dynamic and diverse campaign there is, from business to laborers to workers to environmentalists. And I look forward to having voters select me as their mayor and look forward to the questions tonight. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you very much. So let's jump right in on these issues. One thing everyone who lives in or visits the Seattle area can agree on: traffic here is terrible. Alternative transportation options are a vital resource to connect people to their communities. And Jenny, you will answer here first. How will you create and sustain a transportation plan incorporating transit, vehicle, cyclists, and pedestrians? And how can the companies contributing to Seattle's growth be a part of the traffic solutions?
Transportation is absolutely one of the things that's holding us back as a city. Our transportation system wasn't ready, and we simply have too many cars for too few roads. There was an article in the paper this week that said that census data shows we have over 400,000 cars owned just in the city of Seattle. So we have to get people out of their cars, out of their single occupancy vehicles, and on to transit. That means having better and more transit, going from where people are to where they want to get. So in the short term, that means having more buses going on those routes that are used. People can wait 2 or 3 buses before they can be picked up. It also means speeding up Sound Transit 3, so we get that between West Seattle and Ballard into Seattle. It's got to be a better route for people to travel. The other thing we have to do in the short term is make sure it's safer to bike and safer to walk. And when we're talking about seniors, one of the things I've proposed is to have together an innovative program where we can bring together transportation companies and systems to have a program to pick seniors up and take them to their groceries or to their doctor's appointments, because we want those people aging in Seattle to be able to get around, and sometimes our sidewalks are make it so mobility is tough. Our transportation system isn't friendly. We have to build today a better transportation system for the people who are living here, but most importantly, for the future, so that we really have that city that is connected and getting people out of cars.
Cary, the floor is yours.
So, this is an issue on everybody's minds. You're right. I have a friend in West Seattle who, if she doesn't get on the bus by 7 a.m., she basically can't get to work because the next 8 buses go by packed without stopping for her. We simply need to invest more in reliable, convenient, fast transit service. In the future of our city, we really need to acknowledge that we have limited street space. We can't add more street space, but what we can do is use it more efficiently. So we have to focus on prioritizing safe sidewalks and pedestrian facilities, excellent transit, and that means bus-only lanes, it means bus priority at intersections, it means simply more bus service. And we have to build a full network of protected bike lanes, because having piecemeal bike lanes the way we do now might work for the daredevils in spandex, but it doesn't work for regular people. You have to know you're going to be able to get all the way to your destination, or you're simply not going to take a bike. So I am focused on putting priority on pedestrian, transit, and bike access, so that, and also on delivery and drop off at curbside, because in the future we are going to have to move more people on these same streets that we have now, and that simply means we don't have room for everybody to drive. We need to get as many people encouraged to take other modes so that we leave space for driving for the folks who need to drive for whatever reason. I think how companies can contribute is a fascinating question, because we're doing a really great job of that now with Commute Seattle and downtown Seattle, with a lot of solutions that help employers encourage their employees not to drive alone. And it works. Let's expand it.
30-second rebuttal.
The bad news is it's going to get worse before it gets better. With the mega projects we have coming online with the convention center, all the buses will be on the street. First Avenue will be torn up, and so we really have to take some very aggressive things to get people out of their cars. I want to work with employers, and if I'm mayor of the city of Seattle, to stagger work times. So maybe 20% of the people at Amazon come on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Get people off the roads, get them to carpool, get them to bike, and really get that ethos. We also need free Orca cards for juniors, for our kids, and for our aging population.
Jenny, thank you. Seattle has already been hit with a multi-million-dollar settlement over sidewalk accessibility for the disabled, but this seems to be the symptom of a larger problem involving really a serious lack of sidewalks, limiting the mobility of pedestrians, especially older adults. And Cary, you will answer first here. How will you help address this problem?
I think that lawsuit really was a wake-up call for everyone, because the sheer number of curb cuts and sidewalk improvements we need to make could eat the whole transportation budget. We absolutely have to address this issue, and we have to do it efficiently, and we have to do it quickly, because when you make walking accessible and safe for everyone, we can invite people to use that mode. It's healthier, It's more socially interesting. It's the best way to travel in the city if we provide folks the facilities they can do so they can do so safely. So I think we need to really pursue the principles of Vision Zero, which is a set of strategies to make our whole traffic system safer by reducing speed limits and following a lot of design principles. We need to really focus on how do we build these curb cuts at much lower cost than we are now, because we need to get all the curb cuts built. We can't do this over 50 years. We've got to do this over the next few years. So we've got to figure out a more efficient way to get these done quickly. And we also need to do a lot more to make walking more pleasant. You know, there's a group now that's protesting the beg buttons, where, you know, when the car has a green light but pedestrians magically don't, and you have to ask for permission to cross the street. It shouldn't be that way. We should be prioritizing convenience and safety and comfort of pedestrians and make that our highest priority at SDOT, so that everybody who wants to walk, who wants to be on the sidewalk, feels safe and feels comfortable doing so.
Jenny, your response?
It is such a critical issue for our city on how we handle this. I know 2 different people who, just walking with friends, have tripped on a sidewalk because of an impediment and fallen and hurt themselves and received serious injuries. We've seen throughout Seattle, almost 25% of Seattle doesn't have developed sidewalks. We've been promising it forever, so we need to really look at every neighborhood and community and prioritize building those sidewalks. But the other thing we have to do is look at mobility as a whole and making sure that those people who are in neighborhoods who may not have mobility, that those places are the most clear, in and around transit areas, in and around homes where seniors are living. And also looking at the question of, how are we making the property owners keep up their sidewalks? Anyone who's walked in downtown Seattle neighborhoods know that those construction zones are sometimes the worst. They're impassable. If you can get around the roadblocks, they don't keep up the sidewalk. We as a city have to make sure that we have those property owners actually keep their sidewalks safe. We also have to look at the Vision Zero and looking at the city at the long term. What do we want this city to look like 40 years from now? We want to have that transit-oriented development that is great walking plazas and arrival spots, where the sidewalks are gracious and in and out, where people can leave their bikes. That's the kind of thing we have to be looking for the future. So I think that the sidewalks are really important, but they're part of this overall mobility thing, that we have to make sure that Seattle feels like we are connected in many ways.
Thank you. And Cary, you have an opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal.
I think I want to really drill down on how to prioritize, because we know we can't build sidewalks everywhere. Every mayor has looked at this. We recognize it is so expensive to build urban-style infrastructure in all the neighborhoods. So that means we have to really prioritize safe sidewalk walking facilities around schools, so kids have a safe route to get to school, around places where seniors are, so around senior centers and community centers, and all the routes that get people to the main transit line. So we really have to focus in there on those priorities.
Thank you, Cary. When it comes to affordable housing options in Seattle, 51% of older adults rate the city as fair or poor as city leaders approve neighborhood upzones. There's concern that we're losing more low-cost housing than we gain. And Jenny, you will answer here first. As mayor, what will be your priority beyond requirements for developers to produce and preserve affordable housing?
Affordable housing is a critical issue, and it's got to be the mayor's first obligation when they go into office. Seattle is becoming unaffordable, and we all know people who have either been priced out of the apartment or house that they live in, or even more. I can't tell you how many people I know who've lived in their homes forever. They're seniors, and they can't afford the property taxes. But if they sell, they'll never have a toehold here in Seattle again. So we need to use all of our tools. We have to build more housing as quickly as we can, using not just the funds under HALA, but looking at every parcel of property the city owns and thinking, is that suitable for housing? I would have a moratorium on the sale or transfer of any city property unless we're looking at whether it is suitable for housing. For example, there was an article in the paper about the Seattle trolley line and how the Seattle Department of Transportation was going to sell the air rights to a developer for another office tower. I don't think that's what we need in Seattle. So we need to use community land trust, we need to build, but I've also know that in the short term there's emergencies. I've proposed rent vouchers to help those people stay in place. We're going to have to look at all those tools if we really want to make Seattle an affordable city for people to stay in and for people to be able to be here in the future.
Thank you, Jenny. And Cary, you have 90 seconds.
So last week at the Filipino Community Center, I talked with a hairdresser who's lived in Beacon Hill for decades, and she's in a bind that a lot of people are in, which is her property taxes have gone up so much she can't afford to stay in her house, but she also can't afford to move. So she's stuck. We have created this condition that is simply unfair and unjust for too many folks. We need to look at a whole range of solutions. Number one, this housing market with these steep price escalations rising twice as fast as any other city in the country is simply not natural. There's something happening in our housing market that we have to understand, and it's speculation, and we need to look at the data that shows exactly the dynamic and put in the right disincentive to stop it. Second, we need to make it easier for folks who own a home to build a backyard cottage, make it their home into a duplex, do a mother-in-law apartment, because that way folks who are in a home can start generating revenue through having rental property or rental income on their land and stay in their house. We also need to look at building a lot more affordable housing. If you look at the cities that don't have this problem, that are world-class cities that are growing, that have good economies, the number one thing that prevents this kind of steep escalation in prices is having enough of the total housing stock in public or nonprofit ownership. So we've got to be building affordable housing at 4 times the rate we are now. There's a lot of strategies I've detailed on my website for how to do that, so check out CaryMoonForMayor.com. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I could go on and on.
Thank you. And Jenny, your 30-second
rebuttal
rebuttal
is, first, we do need to build more affordable housing, but we simply don't have the funds to quadruple it right now. We have to be realistic. We have to use the funds we have, but we also have to protect the affordable housing we have. So one thing I proposed, for example, is to go to landlords and say, you are providing affordable rents. We want to give you a break on your property taxes so you can keep the rents low. If you raise the rents, we're going to raise your property taxes and you have to pay it back. But we have to use all tools and look to community-based organization as well to help house their seniors.
Thank you. A majority of Seattle is zoned for single-family housing, which many advocates say limits Seattle's ability to address the affordable housing crisis. And Cary, you'll answer here first. Will you support rezoning more areas of the city to allow for multifamily homes and provide more options for what's considered the missing middle housing?
That is a great question. So I think, yes, we absolutely need to consider it, and here's how. I think it's really important to recognize that the hollow process was a lot of experts at the table together looking at 65 different answers for housing affordability and livability in our city. And we didn't do that key Seattle part of the process where we start discussing with communities how this would work for them and invite them to the table to help shape the solution together. So we created this situation where people felt like the mayor's office was imposing a solution from on high. They didn't get to contribute. They bristled. I would restart that conversation with communities to say, this is how many folks who are moving here. Here are all the tools that we could be using, including backyard cottages, mother-in-law apartments, clustered housing, row houses, stacked flats, duplexes. Show folks all the different models for how do we add infill development in neighborhoods, and invite them to help be part of picking what works for their neighborhood. Because if you impose it from on high in Seattle, that doesn't work. We all feel this right to shape our city, a right to be at the table and help determine what's the right way to grow with grace. And we need to go back and invite folks into the conversation and work this out together. Because there are a lot of tools we could be using to build the missing middle. It's an essential part of the solution, but we've got to involve neighborhoods in doing it together in a way that works for their character that they're trying to protect for how they live their high quality of life in their neighborhood.
Thank you. Jenny?
You know, the concept of the missing middle is so critical to who we are because that's part of what has been Seattle. People could envision having a place here, raising their families here, and knowing their kids could raise their families here. And that dream has disappeared for people. I was talking to some firefighters earlier, and there's firefighters in Seattle who can't afford to live here. And the thought and dream of raising their kids in Seattle doesn't exist for them. So we have to be really focused not just on low-income housing, but also looking at that middle-income housing. There's a couple of very promising projects. There's one down in Pioneer Square where one of the family wealth entities has got together with a developer, and they're going to build a workforce housing opportunity there that will stay that way for the community. I think we need to involve that, but government has to do its share too. We need to make sure that, for example, in single-family housing areas, I've got some friends who for 18 months have been trying to get a permit for a mother-in-law apartment. If we made it easier for folks to get mother-in-law apartments and real backyard cottages, not the monstrosity that everyone's afraid of, we could make almost every single family lot into a triplex overnight. But we're having impediments, so we need to make it a priority, and the mayor needs to say to the housing and zoning people, we're going to speed up affordable housing, we're going to give people the ability to have density, and then we'll move forward. But I think we can do that and accomplish that.
Thank you very much. Your rebuttal, Cary.
So the piece about the missing middle that's so fascinating to me is that, we need to create healthy society where people from at all ages and all stages in life and all incomes can live together in community. And I think we all understand what happens when you start isolating people by socioeconomic status. It is not a healthy society. It's not what we're about in Seattle. So I think we need to include that in the conversation. How do we make sure we're building housing for young folks just coming out of college, for seniors who want to stay in community, because we all know it's healthy when young people and seniors and families can all be in society together.
Thank you very much. When it comes to the issue of homelessness, Seattle has struggled in creating a cohesive strategy, including how to provide outreach, shelter, and address illegal camps. And Jenny, you'll answer here first. What solutions will you propose, and how do they incorporate concerns about camp sweeps and displacement?
The homelessness issue is one that I think that breaks all of our hearts. It has grown in Seattle instead of getting better, and it really tells us a lot about who we are. Seattle is one of the most prosperous cities in the most prosperous country in the world, and yet we have people living in cars and tents and in doorways. We have to do better. As mayor, there's a few things that I would do that I think we need to do immediately. Number one, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The people who are experiencing homelessness have different stories. There's different things that have brought them to the street. I have tried to spend as much time as possible in this campaign actually sitting down and talking to people who are experiencing homelessness, to the people who are working with them to see what are those solutions we can have. So we have, for example, one of the highest populations of moms with kids living in cars anywhere in the country. Those solutions for those people may be different than the people living in the tent. So I think we need to have solutions driven to the people on the streets. The other thing we need to do is have more shelters immediately, short-term shelters, and I have proposed some very specific ways to get there because that is going to be a more humane alternative. But the final solution is we have to have more affordable housing. There simply is not enough affordable housing to move people from the shelter system to a place where they can live and has housing first and have the support that they need.
Thank you very much. Cary?
So I'll agree with Jenny, this is the crisis of our city, and it is heartbreaking for everybody. Whether you're a person experiencing homelessness yourself, whether you have a family member who is. I talked to a mom in the U Village last week who has a son who's living in a vehicle less than a mile away, and he cannot get his act together. She can't get him the help he needs, and she is just heartbroken that she is not able to get him the help he needs. And I think we need to recognize this is a systemic failure across our whole society, our whole city. We need to look at the root causes, understand that the lack of treatment and services for alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and mental health services is simply lacking at the state level. We have an economy that's pushing people into homelessness faster than we can help them out. We have a housing affordability crisis. So let's understand the root causes. It's a lot easier to get to solutions if we're striking this at the root. I believe we need a lot more low-barrier shelters. 90% of folks living outside would come inside if we offered them a place. We need tiny house villages and sanctioned encampments where people can get access to services. And we need to make sure that we are funding the services adequately to help folks once they have a safe place to sleep at night, once they have a roof over their head, to help them get back on their street. Because experiencing homelessness creates its own toxic stress and its own insecurity that puts people deeper in a hole. We've got to provide the services to help them get the help they need to get back on their feet.
Your rebuttal, Jenny?
We absolutely need more shelter space immediately, and I proposed a few ways we can get there. Number one, this is a problem the whole city has to roll up their sleeves and deal with. So I propose every council district should come up with 300 to 500 beds. It could be in a community center, a church, somewhere that's appropriate. In addition, in my first year as mayor, I would build 1,000 micro houses and site them throughout the city. They're not permanent housing, but they're better than tents or bridges or living in a car. We have to do this urgently. We simply can't wait.
Thank you. With the Seattle Police Department still under a federal consent decree, there are continued concerns about officers' use of force and their treatment and interaction with people of color. And Cary, you will answer here first. How will you address these concerns, and what changes would you propose when it comes to police oversight?
So this, again, is a very difficult challenge because we have both people who call 911 are frustrated because there's not service quick enough. We have folks who are afraid to call 911 because they don't feel safe with the police. And we have the police force itself frustrated because they spend all their time on 911 calls and helping people in crisis, that they simply don't have the time to be in community, establishing relationships with folks, building trust, and understanding problems before they arise so that they can do more preventative work. So we absolutely need to continue with the consent decree. I want to really give props to the community groups that came together, asked the DOJ for help, and have been guiding this process all along. They need to stay at the center. The Community Police Commission absolutely needs to stay resourced and have the power and the resources they need to do this work, to guide the process through conclusion. We need to make sure we're focusing on training in alternatives to use of force, de-escalation tactics, helping people in crisis. And we need to do much deeper racial equity training within the police force. You know, our society, in Seattle especially, has a problem with racism under the surface. And we all have to own this. We all have to understand it. We all have to make this transition towards a society that really respects the dignity of every human. And the police force needs to keep doing this training ongoing. It's not just one time check the box. It's ongoing deeper and deeper because we absolutely need to have the most just, least violent, most effective police force out there in our city.
Thank you. Jenny?
Police reform is something I've been working on for decades. You know, 3 different mayors appointed me to different oversight panels. And so when I became U.S. Attorney, I had deep experience in that. And I saw, like everyone else in this town, video after video after video of young men of color being abused by the police. And then John T. Williams was killed in a Seattle street. I worked with the community groups to get the consent decree, and there were 3 things that were critical to me in looking at that. Number 1 is it had to be a consent decree and a federal judge looking, because police chiefs come and go, mayors come and go, U.S. attorneys come and go. We needed someone to say, you're not done till I say you're done, because it's really about cultural change and shifts. We saw that 70% of the time the police were using force, they were using it against someone in mental health crisis or under the influence of drugs and alcohol. That's why we changed from a command and control model to a de-escalation model. The Seattle Police Department has made great strides. The use of force for serious events is down 60%, and every police officer now is required to de-escalate. They work together with mental health trainers and people. It comes back to a committee to make sure they could have done right. We saw with the death of Charlena Lyles that we haven't done enough. But reform is always about getting better, seeing what's happening on the street, making sure that police really do serve and protect. I signed the consent decree originally, and as mayor, I would look forward to making sure there was a time we could say we were done with that part of it, but we're never done with reform.
Thank you. Cary, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I think, we really need to focus on lasting change. How does lasting change happen? It doesn't happen by a top-down decree. It doesn't happen by a mandate from on high. It happens from the organization itself wanting to pursue the change. So to do this, we need to keep going with training. We need to make sure the police force has time to spend time in community, not always being busy on 911 calls, people in crisis. And we need to send folks who are social workers to meet with folks in crisis, not always a police officer with his hand on a gun.
Thank you. Now, from police to crime, whether certain major crimes are trending down or up, there still seems to be a public perception that there are areas of the city where people just don't feel safe, whether it's a neighborhood or an area like 3rd Avenue downtown, which is known for its high volume of drug-related crimes. And Jenny, you will respond here first. How can you and your police force better promote a safer environment to address those perceptions?
You know, part of what's really critical about a city is livable. And part of livability is it feels safe. And not just is safe, but it feels safe. And we have seen some of the data for violent crime increasing in Seattle. I think there's a number of things the city can do about that. I was just talking to a business owner today whose business was broken into, and they called the police. It was some period of time before anyone arrived. And by the time they arrived, it was too late. We have to do a number of things. Number one, we have to tackle the heroin and opiate drug problem. That is causing a lot of our property crime. Until we have better treatment alternatives, you will see people breaking into cars, breaking into homes, and doing those low-level crimes that everyone feels are part of what makes a city livable. They also add to our homelessness. You know, if you look at the people who are experiencing homelessness, the most chronic, they suffer from mental health issues or substance abuse issues. So we have to do more of that for public safety. The other thing we have to do is we have to go back to that community policing model, where police officers actually know the people living in their neighborhoods, the businesses. They get out of their cars, they walk the beat, they know who they are. I've seen that happen. I was doing a walk in Georgetown, and the police officer responsible for that area walked up. He knew everybody by name. He knew the people experiencing homelessness by name. We got to get back to that community model more than we are. I think we can do it as a city, but that comes from leadership from the mayor's office and the chief of police.
Thank you, Jenny. Cary?
So there's a great program in downtown Seattle called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It's a program we invented here that is a national model, and it needs to be scaled out to all the other neighborhoods. Cops know who the people with chronic problems are in any neighborhood, and they know in the old days they had three choices: ignore it, shout at them, tell them to move on, or arrest them. But we now have a fourth tool, which is help them get the treatment they need. And we need to scale this program up. It works beautifully. It helps people. The cops can get people into treatment, into services directly, bypassing the criminal system. We need to do more of that. We need to address the opioid epidemic, and that means we need a lot more treatment services. We need to look at safe consumption sites so that we can help people who are using get access to medical care and get access to treatment when they're ready. And we need to make sure that we are spending enough time, the police are spending enough time in community, out on the street, building trust, building relationships. Because when communities don't feel safe around the police and aren't calling 911, the problems get much worse. And if we're ever going to get ahead of the escalating gang issues in the South End, we have got to build this trust with communities so that the police and communities are working together, and we are focused on have the right information to really address gang violence.
Cary, thank you. A rebuttal, Jenny?
We have to make sure that we address some of these issues as a public health response, not a criminal justice response. I was on the front lines as a criminal defense lawyer when there was the war on drugs, and we incarcerated almost an entire generation of young men, mostly men of color. As we're attacking this problem of the opiate problem, we can't make the same mistake. We really have to have a public health response. So that means more treatment, more diversion programs like LEAD, as Cary mentioned, which was put into place when I was U.S. Attorney. I put in place drug courts both at King County and in the federal courts so people could get treatment instead of convictions. We have to have more programs like that.
Thank you. We mentioned 3rd Avenue and the high number of drug arrests in that area, which brings us to another issue. Police officers tell us that they're frustrated the people they arrest are back on the street in no time at all. Cary, you will answer here first. How will you work with the city attorney, the county prosecutor, and community stakeholders on this, and what programs do you believe can successfully address this issue?
This is a tough one, because people are struggling, people are in crisis, people don't have access to getting back on track with the system we have now. And that means they're back on the street, still addicted, still doing low-level crimes, because that's how they get the revenue to feed the income to feed their habit. And it's simply not working. We all recognize it's not working. I live downtown, I raise my kids downtown, and we've been by 3rd and Pine 10,000 times, and I'm well aware of how much the system is not working. I think we have to, again, focus on LEAD, and we have to focus on getting enough resources for mental health and behavioral health services, and we have to focus on addiction treatment, because so many of these folks are struggling with addiction and simply cannot function in society until they get help with their addiction. So we know what we need to do. It's a matter of resources, and it's a matter of having the commitment and the collaboration between the police department and the city attorney and the court system to help these folks get their lives back on track. We know how to do it. It's just a matter of resources and commitment.
Thank you. Jenny?
The good news about this is we actually have programs we know that work. and we just need to put them in place. You know, there have been, throughout the country over the time, there's been various experiments in place to have, how do you reach those people who are the chronic reoffenders, and how do you make sure you either get them into treatment or get them into workforce training or do a holistic assessment. So what we have to do is change the way we look at this. We will never be able to arrest and prosecute our way out of this problem. If we're looking at low-level drug offenders as a criminal justice issue, we will fail because we've seen that movie before. So we need more diversion programs. We need more treatment. There's only one heroin treatment program in Seattle that does methadone. Only one. And they can only serve 1,700 people. They can't even add a second shift because they don't have enough nurses who can do the work. So we know what works, and we need to do it systematically. So we need to work with law enforcement, not just in Seattle, but regionally and with federal law enforcement, to make sure that we have real treatment options for the low-level offenders and get them treatment instead of incarceration. And for those people who are actually profiting on this, the drug dealers and the cartels who are bringing in the heroin by the caseload, that there's real enforcement mechanisms to stop that. So it is a holistic thing to make sure that we are also working with youth to keep them out of trouble. We're looking at gangs and having credible messengers. There's programs that work on this. We can do it. We just need to do it. And part of it is community-based solutions.
Thank you. Cary, rebuttal?
Yeah, I'd like to focus specifically on young people because I think it's been an issue, the school-to-prison pipeline and the difficulty that young people who have gotten off track have with getting help getting back on track. We really need to focus in on solutions like diversion programs for young people, on restorative justice programs for young people, on all the mentor-based services that young people deserve to get their lives back on track. It's something we know, again, what works. We need resources to fund it.
Thank you. As Seattle grows, many believe low-income neighborhoods are being overly developed or gentrified, forcing residents who lived there for decades out of the city. Jenny, you'll answer first. What will you do to preserve these neighborhoods both in culture and affordability? And how will you incorporate more minority voices in the development of our city's future?
This is a real issue facing Seattle. I was just talking to a family this week who have lived in Seattle for a long time. Their house has been multi-generational, and because of rising property taxes, they just can't afford to live there anymore. You're seeing black Seattleites being pushed out of the Central District and Rainier Valley at a very quick pace. And there's a number of things we have to do to fix this. The first one is we have to maintain affordable housing where it exists. The second is we have to build more affordable housing as quickly as we can in neighborhoods all throughout the city so people can live throughout the city. And we have to have those developers who are building projects not just pay money into the fund, but actually build that affordable housing in those developments themselves. The other thing we have to do, and the really critical thing that we don't talk enough about, is the economic empowerment. We have seen the economic wealth bleed from those neighborhoods as well. And we have to, as a city, we will be giving out billions of dollars in contracts together with other governments. We have to make sure that more of that money goes to those African American businesses. There was a recent study that showed that we went from almost over 20% of funds towards minority businesses. Now it's less than 1%, and the African American businesses do the worst. So we have to drive more money into those businesses so they can build wealth, because wealth is the long-term solution to affordability.
Cary?
So gentrification and displacement is the topic in the South End, and it's an issue that we need to focus on much more creatively, working directly with folks in the South End. In my administration, I commit to sharing power across race and class and gender, because we absolutely have to start developing solutions with folks from communities of color, with lower income folks who understand their plight better than anyone else. We need to work together with them, center their experience, and work together to develop solutions together. There are a lot of great models. I think we could look at El Centro de la Raza and Southeast Opportunity Center. These are projects where the community guided the process. The community says, here is what we need. We need civic space. We need affordable rents for our commercial, locally owned businesses. We need affordable housing to folks from our community. We need cultural and arts production space, and we need social services all together in the development. El Centro de la Raza did a beautiful job building this kind of space that is now a hub in the Latino community, and it works. So the city needs to replicate this again and again throughout the South End and invite communities to come together at a cultural center with affordable housing, with their businesses from their community, because this is the only way we're going to solve this problem long term. The wealth inequality in our city is rising, and we need to focus in on how do we make sure the African American community and other person of color communities are at the table shaping the solutions with the city.
Thank you. Jenny, your rebuttal.
Those voices have to be at the table for every decision. But more importantly, we have to quit having a top-down government. Many of the solutions for our city lie right there in the communities. If you look at Rainier Beach, for example, there's the Rainier Beach Action Coalition and others who have had a very vibrant youth violence prevention program. The city has all but defunded it in terms of energies. We need to re-energize. Last week I was at the Ethiopian Community Center. There's a place where they want to build housing for their elders to keep them connected to the community and the children. But the city has not been a good partner. We need to look for place-based solutions and look to those communities and let them tell us, what do they need?
Thank you. Cary, you will answer here first. In your opinion, how should policymakers and leaders balance addressing the needs or costs of an aging population versus cultivating the untapped skills or assets that lie within the same population?
What's the contrast again? Say it again. Balance what? Two things?
Balancing the untapped skills and assets that lie within the population, basically the seniors in our community.
Mm-hmm. So I think, our culture has gotten cruel to everyone who's marginalized. If you are not a tech worker, if you are not 25 years old, fresh out of college, you're struggling. And I think we need to do a much better job recognizing how healthy society includes people from all ages, all stages in life, all economic classes, and all races and genders in creating a great city together. So I think we need to really focus in on helping seniors get access to volunteer opportunities, get access to job training to develop new skills that they might need in the modern economy, and build a society where we are really respecting and valuing the contributions from people at all ages. In my family business, we were very inclusive in how we shared power, how we shared profits, how we shared decision authority, and shared ownership of the company. And that was the ethic of our business, because we believed that an enterprise that takes care of everybody, an enterprise where everybody's involved, creates a very healthy enterprise where we build trust and we build community and we build profit together. And I believe that that kind of model has been set aside in favor of corporations that are more ruthless around how do we extract the hours from the labor without including them in a constructive way. And I think we need to really think about our corporate culture and how do we make sure that corporations, businesses, small and large, feel this sense of community and being part of the solution to create healthy society.
Thank you, Cary. And how would you, Jenny, reply to that whole addressing the needs of the aging population?
We have to do a better job, and that's one reason today I released an age-friendly agenda. It's a lot of things I've been talking about over the last few months. But if you're looking at the crisis we have right now in affordability, it's hitting our aging population almost the hardest because they live often on fixed incomes. They often have less mobility. They sometimes are isolated and cut off from their families. So there's a number of things I think the city has to do. One I proposed is there's a property tax break for seniors, but it's only for those earning less than $40,000. I want to raise that so more seniors can stay in their home. We also have proposed the rent voucher program so seniors can get a rent voucher to help them stay in their home. There's a utility rates program where there's a break, but it's so cumbersome. If I'm mayor, we're going to have a portal, one-stop shopping to help seniors get those breaks on the utility rates that they deserve. Also, I've talked about that transportation pilot to get people involved, to take seniors back and forth to doctor's appointments, to groceries. You see so many people that are walking with their walkers dangling 2 grocery bags off as they try to get on a sidewalk that isn't fixed. We need to also make sure that mobility works for seniors so that those sidewalks are fixed in and around grocery stores and transit centers and around where people are living. So that pedestrian friendly is critical. Nutrition is so important. We've got to have Meals on Wheels and all of those things be supported and vibrant. And the last thing I'd say is caregivers. We need to support our caregivers too, because they are not getting enough respite care. They're not getting enough support. And without them, sometimes our seniors don't have enough support either.
Thank you. Cary, a rebuttal?
I just want to take a minute to tell the story of the new market front development at Pike Place Market and the whole way Pike Place Market works, because it is such a fascinating and healthy community. There's senior housing, there's low-income housing, there's a food bank, there's a child care center, and then there's, of course, the Pike Place Market that we all understand. But the infrastructure that supports that is really fascinating because it creates this healthy society where the seniors work at the preschool, where everyone volunteers at the food bank, and it builds this really healthy community where everyone cares for one another, and that's the model for what we need to be doing in other places in the city.
Thank you very much. And I've just been told, due to time constraints, there will be no more rebuttals for the rest of the debate. Please keep that in mind. A major purpose of this debate is to promote a Seattle for all ages. And Jenny, you'll answer here first. What does that mean to you, and how will you make a successful model for the city?
That's such a great question, because we really need to have that city that works not just for the aging population but for our youth. And it's not working for anybody right now. Our city has become too crowded and too unaffordable and too hard to get around with transportation. So we need to make sure that we fix all those things we've been talking about here tonight, that we really look at the transportation infrastructure and think about how is it working for our youth, for those that are the workforce and those that are aging, and having ways, whether it's free Orca cards for youth so that they get used to using buses and transit and stay on it, to our seniors having that subsidy as well. We also have to have a city that is really looking at how are we taking care of our youth, particularly in schools. The Family and Education Levy is up for reauthorization, and the mayor will have a really important part in dealing with that. We need to focus particularly on those schools where the opportunity gap is the greatest. It's our students of color. And we need to take the money and make sure that we address that, working with the Seattle Public Schools, communities, and educators. That's why I've also proposed that for our youth, for those that actually do graduate from a Seattle public school, they get 2 years free tuition in a community college. We'll have counselors in the high schools getting them ready to get there, and counselors in the college when they arrive. It shows graduations go up, their opportunity go up. They can get the skills and training for a trade or for computer programming, or they may go to a four-year college. But we have to make this city work better for everybody.
Thank you. Cary?
I think one of the key issues in this question is how do we build an economy that works for everybody? Because we're at this point in our society where we all see the wealthy few accumulating more and more wealth while other people fall further and further behind and into debt. So we need to really focus on how do we invest in an economy that builds well-being for everyone. And that means small and local owned businesses. It means having a manufacturing and industrial economy for the future focused on green energy and other new technologies, because we need to focus on creating wealth that gets recirculated in the community to create economic stability for everyone. So to me, that is one of the essential parts of building a Seattle that's welcoming and inclusive to all. And the other thing I'd like to talk about specifically is the public realm. I think, as someone who studied urban planning, landscape architecture, urban design, the key idea of a city is a place where people live in democracy, in society, in a way where we are all related to one another, supporting one another, and able to, prosper together. And I think the more we create great public realm, great parks with places that are inclusive and inviting for everybody, great streets that are walkable for everybody, we are creating the kind of culture in our physical built environment that is welcoming and inclusive and inviting for everyone. There's a lot we can do in the other realms around school, around the other issues, but I would really like us to focus more on a great public realm and physical built environment and an economy that works for everybody.
Thank you. We're starting to run short on time. We're going to shorten the answer time now to 60 seconds each. Please keep that in mind. The City Council recently enacted an income tax on individuals earning more than $250,000 a year. Cary, you will answer first here. Do you support or oppose an income tax in Seattle? And what other plans do you have to increase revenue for the city?
So we have the most regressive tax system in the country, in our state. That means lower income people pay 7 times as much of their income as a percentage than high earners. It's simply out of balance. It's not working. We all see the failure to develop the revenue streams we need to invest in the infrastructure we all need to thrive. We know we need great schools. We know we need great transit. So we need to try everything we can to shift towards a more progressive tax system. So the high earners income tax in the city, I think, was a shot across the bow. It was we need to have this discussion. Here's an idea on the table. Can we make it work? It might not make it through the legal system, but we are now all having this conversation about a more progressive tax system. I believe we need to work with the state and talk about high earners capital gains tax. We need to look at inheritance and estate taxes. We need to look at taxes on perhaps capital gains taxes on luxury property. We need to have this conversation more broadly about the whole range of possible solutions.
Thank you. Jenny.
We absolutely have one of the most regressive tax systems there is. We've been fighting this for decades in Washington State, and I strongly support both the statewide income tax and what the City Council did. I have doubts about whether that will be found to be legal, but we need to push that envelope. Part of the problem, though, is most of the proposals that Cary has proposed require Olympia to give approval. And that's unlikely in the short term or the long term. So we have to keep pushing that and looking for a more progressive system so that the people who have more pay more. But we have to look right here in the meantime to what we have. We have urgent needs, and we have the ability to tap some of the resources here, which is why all of the proposals I have made on transportation and housing, we're looking to the budget as it is and the resources that we've had so that we can make sure moving forward we can really tackle these problems without having to say, Mother may I to Olympia. We still absolutely have to push it. We need more progressive taxes, but in the meantime, we need real solutions.
Thank you. The opioid addiction crisis affects every age and socioeconomic group. One solution proposed in our area is the creation of supervised injection sites. Opponents say the sites will promote illegal drug use and contribute to criminal behavior. Jenny, you'll answer here first. What do you believe?
I think, as I said, we have to have a public health response to the opioid problem. And the safe consumption sites, as they're called, is part of harm reduction. A lot of people say, we're surprised, you were a federal prosecutor. How could you be for this? We had the same debate when we were talking about needle exchanges and when there was the AIDS epidemic and people thought, how can you give clean needles? We've shown that works. It has worked, it has saved lives. But now we're in the situation where we say, here's your safe needle, but go into your park, your doorway, your car. There's no park in Seattle right now that you can walk in where you don't see needles. It's impossible to walk your dog without seeing them on the sidewalks or seeing people using drugs. If we have these sites, if there is a healthcare provider there, it can save lives. But just as importantly to me, and as part of the proposal, is that there's someone there that can connect them with treatment alternatives. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing safe about using drugs, but we've got to try to get people into treatment.
Thank you. Cary?
I'd like to answer this, but first I want to go back to the last question. Mother, may I? Come on. We know that we need more progressive tax system in our whole state, and we know Seattle has to lead, and we know Seattle has to develop a public will with mayors from other cities and across the state to push Olympia, working with our delegation there to build a more progressive tax structure. I'm not asking for permission from Olympia. I'm building the public will and leading from the city of Seattle because this is a problem we need to solve and we need to take ownership of it. So the opioid addiction, yes, I support safe consumption sites that have medical professionals on staff to help people if they should run into a medical crisis during using, and also treatment services available to folks, because when people come in, if they're using and they're ready to stop, if they're ready to get over their habit, we have to have somebody there right now ready to help, because if they wander out the door to come back in 2 weeks, they may never come back.
Thank you. Well, we've now come to the closing remarks, and we will start with Cary. You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So it has been a real pleasure to talk through solutions with you here tonight. I think one of the things I hope you learned about me is that I am deeply committed to this city. I am ready to fight for these solutions because we are at a crossroads in Seattle. If we don't figure out how to get ahead of the homelessness crisis, how to get ahead of the housing affordability crisis, if we don't figure out how to invest in transit to match our growth, if we don't develop bold solutions to an economy that builds prosperity for everybody, not just the lucky few, we know what could happen. And so I am ready as mayor to work with city council, to work with the many advocacy and community groups, to work with the 11,000 professional experts who are on city staff to identify a constructive future vision, to lay out an action agenda to get there, to define the evaluation metrics and the reporting back to communities, because we need to pull together in the same direction. This can't be a mayor's office that's too driven by politics and detached from city government. It has to be a collective effort led by a strong vision from the mayor's office as chief executive. So that is the kind of mayor I'm going to be, and that's the sort of process I'm going to use to build public will for solutions, to implement these solutions that we need in our city, because we know what's at stake. We know that we are at risk of becoming a playground for the rich, where we've pushed out communities of color, we've pushed out artists, we've pushed out lower income folks, the teachers, the baristas, the physical therapists we count on every day, who serve our community every day, who can't afford to live in our community anymore. We've got to get ahead of that challenge if we want to sustain the city that we know we can be, which is a city committed to the well-being of everybody, a city that's affordable, that's inclusive, that's diverse, and that represents the best of Seattle's progressive values.
Thank you. Jenny, you have 2 minutes.
You know, Cary and I have identified the same problems and actually have a lot of the same solutions and plans. The big difference between the two of us is really who can get them done. There's a difference between talk and action, and experience in getting it done. You know, we hear a lot about what the plan will be and what we will do. These are things I've been working on my whole life. You know, I've actually gone to Olympia and had to work for years trying to get through something progressive. I worked on LGBTQ issues in Olympia, trying to get non-discrimination bill and marriage, literally for decades. I know how to build coalitions and how to get that will. So I don't need someone to tell me how to work in Olympia. It's why the governor and the attorney general and state legislators are supporting me, because they know I will be a strong partner to actually move forward these progressive values we all care about. Because at the end of the day, we can have all the great plans we want, but if we don't put it in place, if we don't really help people, if we don't have something that changes lives, those plans mean absolutely nothing. So if I'm mayor, every day I'll be getting up thinking about, as I walk around all parts of this city, which I will continue to do, how are we helping people today? Are we making things better for people today? Have we tackled homelessness in a way that's humane and compassionate and moved people into long-term housing that's supportive? Have we helped our kids get from where they are now to those jobs of the future? Do the workers in Seattle feel like they have a place here? Do the nurses and firefighters and iron workers and dock workers who have put their trust in me and their hope in me and have supporting me, are they able to live and work in this city and have that same kind of future that I've had to have? That's the kind of city we need to have. We need to have that city that in the future works for everybody in Seattle, where every neighborhood has people of all economic status and every race and faith. And we are still inventing the future, because Seattle still is the best city there is.
Thank you, and that brings us to our conclusion. Thank you very much. Thanks again to our candidates, Jenny Durkan and Cary Moon, for being here this evening. Thanks to our audience here with us. You'll be able to watch the debate again on air this Saturday at 9 p.m. on KOMO 4.